we invited Shirl to do this talk is for a couple. One is the importance of Josiah Henson to our local history. I think it's a phenomenal story, but also it is such a visible landmark on the landscape, and the founding of the museum and the park is the culmination of many years of hard work, and it's something that I think as the history community that we need to collectively celebrate. And there is no one better than Shirl to help us get a full appreciation of Mr. Henson's contributions, as well as to share with us in our, hopefully our post-COVID world, what it will be like to visit the museum. So with that, Shirl, you can turn on your mic and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you very much, Matt. Both Matts, the Matt behind the scene and the Matt that we see this morning, and to the Montgomery County Historical Society for the invitation to participate this morning with sharing our most exciting project that I will shamelessly say is parks. I know there's lots of things that we do, but this one is exceptionally exciting. So I'm really happy this morning to have the opportunity to do that. And I think if we're ready, I will share my screen. Matt?
I think so. It should be turned on now for you. So, okay.
And now you see it.
And now we see it. Okay, now we're good to go. Okay.
Magic.
Thanks, everyone. We'll
magic. All right.
And Shirl, I'm going to go ahead and stop your video too, so we can just see the presentation.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Unless you want, I want to keep it on. That's up to you.
No, that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
It's all about Father Henson. It's not about me this morning.
Okay.
It is all about him. And with that said, I would like to begin again. And thank you all for joining us this morning. We're going to be building the new Josiah Henson Museum and Park. I am the countywide museum manager for Montgomery Parks. I have been here for 12 years now. Well, oops, almost 13. And am really excited that this was one of the first projects that I walked through the door with at the ground, where it was in its beginning phase. And so that's been really exciting. The other parks, I inherited wonderful parks and projects and volunteers and wonderful things, but this project was very special. And so it was exciting to come in at the ground floor. Now, usually when I talk about Reverend Henson, I can spend anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes to an hour. You give me enough time and I could gush about Father Henson for forever. But this morning, it is about this new park that's going to be dedicated to him. But I do want to walk you through who Reverend Henson is. And let's just start off with this man who was an extraordinary man, I think, and one who lived what I would say is an ordinary life. If we look at his birth as an enslaved baby in Maryland, Charles County, of course, his birth is the same as any other enslaved child's birth. He's born into a system where there's no guarantee as to the future that his parents can control. His mother, his father, they can't even guarantee that they will be able to raise him, that he won't be torn from them at some point. His childhood is ordinary. In his childhood, he witnesses horrors no child today should ever experience. The torture, the horrors, the heartbreak, the hard work from the moment that he can stand and walk through a field, being torn from family members on an auction block. The life that he grows up into, where he is coming into his manhood in a system that is structured to dehumanize and deny him as a Black man that very existence as a man. But this boy who came, this young man, has this extraordinary light, I like to think, within him that governs him for the rest of his life. And the light within him causes him to do some extraordinary things. Now, one of the things that he does while enslaved is he becomes a minister, a Methodist minister. Is this ordinary? Is it extraordinary? Could be ordinary. There are other enslaved men and women who became, men particularly, who became ministers. But this particular minister wanted to get his freedom. And in order to secure that freedom, he tries an honorable method to purchase his freedom, is tricked cruelly out of that opportunity, and reaches a point of such desperation that he attempts murder, contemplates murder to seize his freedom. That does not come to part, fortunately, through divine intervention, and he does do something extraordinary. He escapes with his wife and 4 children along the Underground Railroad out of a Kentucky plantation all the way to Canada. And it is in Canada where his life takes this extreme change upward. Canada, of course, is Canaan, the promised land. When he reaches this promised land, he helps to establish a settlement called Dawn, a safe haven for other enslaved people that are coming out of the United States to Canaan, this Canada, this promised land. And here, he doesn't just rest with his family in building a community of people who are already there, who find their way there. He goes back along this same Underground Railroad and serves as an Underground Railroad conductor, bringing over 100 souls to freedom from Kentucky. Does that make him extraordinary? I think it makes him special. But there were others who helped guide desperate souls to freedom. But it was in 1849 when his life story that he dictated published that was captured in the attention of a young woman, a young white abolitionist and a writer, Harriet Beecher Stowe, who went on to write Uncle Tom's Cabin, a phenomenal best-selling book that is translated and read across the globe. When this 1849 autobiography that he wrote, of course, is that ordinary? Well, there are other slave narratives that are published during the 1840s of the time period that tell similar tales. But when this one is captured by Harriet Beecher Stowe and woven together with other slave narratives to form this fictional tale that will paint a most vivid and horrific picture of chattel slavery in America in an effort to abolish it, well, then the challenge is on for him to continue the work and become the abolitionist. Of course, there were denials with her book. You see here a copy of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin. And this was so that she would prove that the stories where she changed the names to protect the innocent went on to tell their story. Well, the fame that was garnered from Uncle Tom's Cabin, 1852's publication, went on to propel him onto an international stage of other abolitionists. He travels throughout England, he travels through parts of Europe, through northern United States, preaching for the abolition of slavery while sharing the story of his life. Does this make him an extraordinary man? Is this ordinary? Does an audience with the Queen Victoria in England in the 1850s and to serve as an exhibitor at the world's first fair, the Crystal Exhibition in London, England, these surely must make him an extraordinary man. I don't know of many that I've read throughout history who were born enslaved in Maryland to rise to a level where they're invited to meet the Queen of England. That's an extraordinary life. It is this life that Reverend Henson paints for us or leaves the information in his autobiography through his words that help inspire us. I just want to share with you, and you can read here on the screen, but I'll just read it aloud with you. I will conclude my narrative by simply recording my gratitude, heartfelt and inexpressible, to God and to many of my fellow men, and finally, for the cheering expectation of benefiting not only the present, but many future generations of my race. This is Reverend Henson's legacy to us. This is a legacy that was much admired and modeled in the 19th century, as well as being admired and modeled today. These traits of leadership, service to others, and an undying faith that guides him throughout his life. And it is this legacy that we have the pleasure and the honor of sharing with you all with the creation of the Josiah Henson Museum and Park. So, welcome to the new Josiah Henson Museum and Park. All right. So that's our teaser. That's what you all have been driving around and seeing on Old Georgetown Road. But what does the beginning look like? How in the world did we reach this gorgeous, near $9 million facility? Well, it started with a team, a really large team, a team made up of park staff, led by our Cultural Resources Stewardship section within our Park Planning Stewardship Division, those staff, park development, our facilities management, a host of architects and exhibit design firms, community members, but most importantly, the descendants. The descendants for both the Henson and Riley family contributed tremendously to this project and throughout the project. These are those who have helped to make this your museum. So the process begins with acquisition and research. Where we began in 2006 was the purchase of the home of the Mallet-Prevot family. And this very beautiful colonial revival style home, very simple, set in the Lux Manor neighborhood, was one that we were most fortunate to acquire. When we did, it came with it a bit of folklore, a bit of a mystery to it. The log structure, which you can just see at the edge of this image, is one that carried with it the moniker Uncle Tom's Cabin. Because as we found out that a number of community people and folks throughout the county knew that Reverend Henson had lived and grown up here, enslaved on the community, enslaved on this plantation. But could that have been where he lived, where he dwelled? It looked like a log cabin. And you'll see additional pictures of it in a little bit. It looked like a log cabin. It looked much older than the house to which it was attached. And so, one of the mysteries that we had to do is to determine whether or not this was, in fact, Uncle Tom's cabin. Well, as it turns out, one of the first things that we did was to do a historic structures report. Our policy documents that guided this process. Of course, we're coming from our strategic plan from artifact to attraction into our historic structure report, which was able to provide historic research, assess the conditions of the house, how would we move forward to transforming this very simple structure and this family home into a public historic site and then into a museum. And so there was a wealth of research done over the next couple of years. As just this report was developed, there was a plan to determine how we would interpret the site. Documents were reviewed, archives were visited, and an archaeological investigation begun. This are just a couple of the artifacts which were excavated during this phase one of the archaeological survey. So what was determined coming out of our facility plan process was that we had our direction of how we would be moving forward in the development of this museum. And it was all of us. We had the words of Reverend Henson himself. His autobiography laid out the footprint for how we would establish the museum. his autobiography through the telling of his life's experiences through birth, all the way through his escape and the establishment at dawn, laid out the interpretive themes that would carry us forward. It is his own words that we wanted to capture, that people would come to the museum and hear his words that told his story. This was the guiding principle for the museum. So it seems easy. We had this in our possession the entire time. To give you a sense of what the history of the house looked like when we acquired it, this is the early image we have from 1919. This was the Riley house. This is how it was remodeled by the Bolton family in the 1930s to its colonial revival style. Changes were made to the house to modernize it. And it is these changes for the 1936 colonial revival architectural style that we are able to have it placed on the National Register for Historic Places. So you will find that there. Also, as we move forward, and I'll explain in our master plan process, what we acquired originally was the acre. And then later on, we were able to acquire our next door neighbor's property in 2009, the Rozier property, to give us an acre and a half. What you see here in a map outline from 1863 is 272 acres of Isaac Riley's original property. So we have a teeny tiny corner of a very large plantation in which to tell this extraordinarily important story. And I know some of these images may be familiar to you all because you've been visiting us over the past decade. Just to give you a reminder of where we came from, what the beginning looked like. These were the images of the early house when we purchased it in 2006, and some of the improvements that were made, just a few paint jobs, these sorts of things. And if you remember, I love to call the garage our education center, our first small education center. Inside, if you remember our very modern 1930s kitchen, we have the dining room area with a chandelier that had to be lifted for those who were taller than 6 feet so they wouldn't bump their heads if they came through on house tours. These are the living room images. And keep in mind, for those early tours, as we went through, we didn't have artifacts. The archaeological excavations were just beginning, and we took those on after the historic structure report ended and that team left. What we were able to do is provide tours telling his story. We used the words of Reverend Henson. Interior images of the log kitchen, which in 2006 were these, a beautiful paneled den that the Boltons had added to the house. They'd also added, as we remember, taking our tours, an entrance from the log kitchen into the house, which didn't exist during the 19th century. This is what it was stripped down to by the time we began our tours. In 2009, as I said, here is that Rozier property, which existed right here. And as we moved into the master plan phase, well, let me come back here for a second. One of the key elements that come out of the historic structure report and the reporting phase is that what we wanted to do was to expand the property. We wanted to have an ability to grow. The master plan process would have provide that for us. Now, remember that I mentioned the local lore had the community calling this small house the Uncle Tom's cabin, well, the log cabin attached to it. Once we completed the historic structures report, we went through archaeological investigations. There was dendrochronology done twice on the log structure to determine that it wasn't a cabin at all. What it was constructed in 1850-51. The conception was that it was older than the frame structure attached to it, which you see in just this image. And through the architectural historical research of the late Orlando Rideout with MHT, we were able to determine that the original frame structure was built in 1800 to 1815, much older than the log cabin of its local lore. So the master plan changed this. The master plan was determined to take the name from Uncle Tom's Cabin Special Park to Josiah Henson Special Park. And that was a public process. It was one where there were a number of community meetings, focus groups. We even established the first advisory group for the project, a scholarly advisory group made up of scholars, both local and some distant, community leaders from both our African American community, our descendants, always present throughout this process. What came from the master plan, along with the name change, was the concept for the site plan and moving forward, in where there was the moderate plan, the moderate option adopted, and the master plan approved in December 2010. So if we can just see here what changes were proposed for it in this moderate plan, you had definitely the historic house, what would now become the Riley Bolton House. What we would do is we would take down this garage so that we would have perhaps a visitor orientation space here. We would also had another option for a visitor orientation space here in the larger area of the Rozier property. Most importantly, for anyone that's traveled along Old Georgetown Road, and you know that this is a very small site, we don't have on-site parking. We didn't then. And it was really one of the number one challenges within the site plan is how would we safely bring visitors in and out of the property, particularly our school groups, who would be one of the larger audiences coming in. And so the master plan helped to determine that there would be the all important bus turnaround, a safe way to enter the property, exit the property, drop off visitors so that they could park across the street at Wall Local Park, which remains our parking for it. The other part of the master plan is that it helped, well, actually before the master plan, it was during the development and the writing of the historic structures report that the interpretive themes were determined for the park. Now, we had the terrific fortune of working with two of the most foremost scholars in African American history and African American architecture, and that was the late Dr. Diane Swan Wright and Dr. Cheryl LaRoche. And Dr. LaRoche is fabulous. She's been with us throughout the project from our acquisition through till today. She has served as one of our number one scholarly cheerleaders, as I would call her. But if you see these themes that became part of the exhibition that I'll show you at the end for the park, we look at Reverend Henson's life as through his life provide the lens to the interpretive themes and what we would talk about so that people would begin to understand the experience of being enslaved in Montgomery County. What was early life like, family life, spirituality, the role it played, childhood, work and living conditions, travel and independence that was afforded to Reverend Henson during his term as superintendent of this plantation, which belonged to Isaac Riley. We have leadership responsibilities. As always, there is punishment and resistance to enslavement. The Riley plantation itself, we would have an opportunity to explore who the family was. How typical is this plantation in its representation of others throughout the county and throughout the state? Archaeology would prove to be one of the strongest elements of the interpretation of the park, and that it would be woven through each of these themes would be the presence of archaeology and the ongoing search for the physical evidence, these remains of the life that Henson and the Riley family lived there. Myth, of course, there's freedom and emancipation, looking at the methods towards freedom. Self-purchase was the goal of Josiah Henson. Escape became the means via the Underground Railroad. We want to look at the free Black communities, which would come up within the county after the Civil War. Of course, the myth, literature, history, and stereotypes associated with Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom's Cabin are key elements of how we focus on this story. We will look at slave narratives, explore their critical importance in helping us to understand and appreciate where we are and the role that Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 Uncle Tom's Cabin plays in it. These are how we structured the exhibits moving forward. Now, we just did not stay locked away in our offices and in state archives looking for research and the archaeologists out digging. We had programming. We were open. 2008, I arrived and we began with our public programming, the first of which was meeting Josiah Henson. We have here represented a reenactor and performer, Bus Howard, from here in Maryland, who portrayed Reverend Henson at this very special program. We offered the first house tours of it. We had a most important and panel discussion on who was Josiah Henson, led by Dr. Shirl Roche. For those who don't know, she is a historical and our archaeological consultant with the University of North Carolina. I'm sorry, that's me with the University of North Carolina, but she's with the University of Maryland. And then Dr. Diane Swan Wright, as I say, who has left us, was at that time the director and curator of the Frederick Douglass Isaac Meyer Maritime Park Museum out of Baltimore, Maryland. So we have our tours of the house, and our public programs continued over the past decade. We had opportunities to host special events at the site several times during the year. It was never open continuously. We would open it 2 to 3 times during the year, during Black History Month, during Montgomery County's Heritage Days, and to celebrate Maryland's Emancipation Day in November. So this is but a scene from our celebrations during Black History Month, where we would have our lyrical rhythms, The Sound of Freedom. And this was a young 5th grade group from Glen Haven Elementary School in Silver Spring that would come and do a step routine. They were a favorite group that would come during our spoken word events. And again, this is our log kitchen during the early days, where tours would be provided for visitors moving through, where they could understand what his story was like, what life was like. Coming into the facility planning phase, we were fortunate to have joining our team now the team from LSC Design, who is out of York, Pennsylvania, and Exhibit Design, which worked on the exhibits out of Boston, Massachusetts. But the goals of the facility plan were to create, of course, the museum quality visitor experience, accurately portray his life, the impact of Stowe's novel, the Maryland experience in slave. Look at the frame house, retain its features that remain from 1800 to 1850, which would be the log kitchen, retain that 1930s appearance, return the log kitchen to its mid-19th century appearance, and then for the site, seamlessly blend that visitor experience from exhibits to the house to the grounds, and take that visitor from the contemporary time period of the 21st century back to the 19th century as best that we could. This was our group. This was our team working on the architectural layouts and working on the site overview. This is what LSC designed as we're looking at, and this is one a little later. What the master plan did, if I could just go back for a second, is allow us an opportunity to acquire with our moderate option plan. It afforded us the opportunity where we would be able to expand through the acquisition of other properties that would come to us. So in 2009, as I said, we acquired the Rozier property, which was next door, right to the rear of the property. We, in 2013, acquired the Beamer property. And then in 2014, we acquired the Murphy property. So in looking at how we would develop the site, keeping in mind that visitors are going to be parking over in Wall Local Park, where the Kennedy Shriver Aquatic Center is, and then cross Old Georgetown Road, coming to the park this way. And work continues, by the way. If anyone knows Old Georgetown Road and this intersection, one of the challenges, how do we mitigate foot traffic across this busy intersection? Work is continuing on that. SHA and Department of Transportation and our county executives are working with us very much to ensure that we can provide this safe transition for folks. The facility plan also provided a perspective of what the new visitor center would look like. We wanted to ensure that it would encompass a theater, retail, a small gift shop, all important restrooms. At the time, we had a porta-john out there, and provide a courtyard. This would be an entry point for the visitor to become acclimated to the park, become acclimated to the 19th century story that we would be telling inside of the park. Here's a little more details of the proposed site plan that was developed during the facility plan phase. You have your historic house here, the Riley Bolton House. You had what would be the footprint of the future visitor center, that courtyard, and then we began to construct a pathway. And along this pathway, and as we explored the exhibits, which I'll get to in a second, let me go back to the theater and the visitor center. Our orientation film that will be shown in the theater is not the only star of the theater. This is a multi-purpose theater that seats about 80 people that will provide an opportunity for the community to come in, be able to have small gatherings, their meetings, and so forth. This, as I said at the beginning, is your museum. So we've tried to incorporate as many spaces where the public would feel comfortable and welcome here. There is also inside of the historic house on the second floor going to be a research library. We'll see that a little later. But the facility plan also developed a look for what would our exhibits look like and feel like, both on the exterior and inside. One of the ideas that came from the facility plan process, and again, this is a process that involved a number of community meetings, focus groups. We took ideas from our advisory groups, from descendants, from all of you. What did you want to see when you came to the park? What would tie in the architectural elements of the building, as well as the archaeological excavations that were going to be continuing throughout the process? This portal that's noted here, an introduction to Josiah Henson's life, would sit above an archaeological feature that was found determined to be a structure. Now, it could be a site of the superintendent where Henson may have lived. That's yet to be determined, but we know definitely that there was a structure there. And above the structure, we were dreaming as big as we could. We said, what if we could place a portal there that would allow people to walk through a representation of the slave quarter? Because keep in mind, Reverend Henson didn't live in the log kitchen as it was determined to be, that's attached to the frame house. He would have lived in slave quarters on the property. So that was an idea that was spawned from the facility plan, as well as the outdoor exhibits. There would be established a kitchen garden, truck patch, perhaps a demonstration farming area, the types of crops that were grown on the plantation. Of course, within the house, there would be exhibitions that would feature in what originally were rather grandiose ideas. One of the ideas inside of the house where we would place exhibits focused on Henson's life, the story of how we came to know, the research that was done, how we came to know about the site, and more about Henson's life. What this is an image illustration, it's one of my favorites. There was the idea of incorporating a really large book. I mean, we are telling the story based on his book, so the book is most important, the autobiography. Well, this autobiography, this representation of a book, was going to be somewhere between 7 and 8 feet high. We said that's interesting, that could be kind of cool. We'll see, let us sleep on it. What the facility plan did was also define the circulation of how visitors would enter and exit the historic house, which is the museum now. And I think this is perhaps the most important element of the facility plan that came from it. And this was the determination that we would enter the property as Reverend Henson did, from the rear, as any of the enslaved would. It's his story. It's his story of how he worked, accessed this property, the buildings on it, as well as how he would have interacted with his enslaver, Isaac Riley. So it was determined that as you entered the house, you would enter through the rear. This west wing that's shown here is that 1930s kitchen. Kitchen was dismantled so that the visitors would have access coming into the property, moving in through the former kitchen area, what is now the west wing, coming into the dining room space. We would close off this area that would take you into the log kitchen, because historically that wasn't true. This didn't happen until the 1930s. Historically, the log kitchen had an entrance from the rear and an entrance from the front, and this was walled off. We would restore those entrances within the log kitchen. You would flow through the house and then exit out of the living room from onto the porch. The original ideas for the porch is that it would be enclosed. We've not yet had an opportunity to fundraise to the point where we can enclose that porch, which was added during the 1930s renovation. And we have been able, though, to place beautiful exhibits out there. We can most definitely, the goal was to utilize that space for exhibits and have the visitors exit onto an ADA pathway that circled the park. You would then come into the log kitchen through its traditional means, coming in through the rear, exiting out of the front. Now, that was the goal at the time. We have since found that we're not going to be exiting out of the front of it. And within the log kitchen, we would restore this space, this log kitchen, which was constructed in 1850-51, back to that 19th century time period, just furnishing it most modestly so you get a sense that you have stepped back in time, at least into this building. The other distinction with this museum and this historic house is that we would not restore these rooms to either a 1930s look or a 19th century look, but we would use the space to install modern, contemporary, multimedia exhibits. The end, we established a public museum that, of course, will celebrate the challenging and inspiring life of Reverend Henson, that will educate visitors on enslavement in Maryland, promote a greater appreciation of history in Montgomery County. And I will add that this museum will also become the space which will be a safe space for the community to come and talk about these contemporary issues of race and the impact and the legacy of enslavement on us today. They have carried throughout. And so in our programming and moving forward, we'll be looking at exploring these issues of racial and social justice and racial equity and these issues. These are the charge of the new Josiah Henson Museum. Archaeological investigations. Archaeology, as I said, played a key role in developing the interpretation of this park. I'm going to let you meet our senior archaeologist and the lead archaeologist on the project, Cassandra Michaud.
Hey, Shirl?
Yes.
Could you turn up your computer volume a little bit? I don't think you actually shared the sound on the presentation.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to, the best way to, I'm not quite sure how to fix that. If you want to pause that real quick.
Okay, well, I can say what she's saying.
Okay, how about we do that? That'll work.
I'm so sorry. Let me go back. I was just simply going, I understand that you all don't have audio for it, and I was going to just say what Cassandra was saying, just repeat for that if you'd like to see it. So let's do that. I can do that. So here they are outside, and here is Cassandra.
Josiah Henson was enslaved on this property in the early 19th century. He later becomes the overseer, and later he escapes to Canada with his family and becomes a conductor on the Underground Railroad.
So Cassandra's just recapped that Henson was enslaved on the property, that he escaped from Canada in 1830, and Here we are inside of the historic log kitchen.
We are in the log kitchen at the Josiah.
They're in the log kitchen of the Josiah Henson house, and these excavations took place right before our construction began
So the log kitchen
in 2019. The log kitchen would have originally had an earthen floor.
and we're currently trying to determine the age of each of those floors.
There were 2 additional floors excavated below them.
Primarily it was for cooking and food storage, but we also have evidence that there were children present based on marbles and dominoes. We are at the exterior of the log kitchen, and this structure was built in
You know what?
1850
Hang on
after
one second. Because it is kind of awkward with you all, unless you're reading lips. In the end, if I have an opportunity, let me come back and play it for you. And I'm so sorry about the audio. I might be able to tweak that, but my apologies on that, Cassandra. I'm so sorry. It was really cool. But we're still going to talk about the archaeology. Will that be all right, Matt?
Yeah, that's great. That's perfectly
Okay.
fine.
Okay, I'll just keep rolling then. So, as noted, our archaeological work began in '07 with phase 1 surveys during the process of developing the historic structures report. Excavations then became the task of our park staff. Cassandra was one of the lead archaeologists on it, and we've had a team of volunteers who have been phenomenal in helping to excavate this property. This was happening in 2012. Time Team America came to the property. We were one of 4 sites selected nationwide to have an excavation done. What Time Team America does, for those of you who remember perhaps this happening, is they spend a weekend to come in and see what they can discover. And this was the search for Josiah Henson. They wanted to see within the 3 days that they were there, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, what could be excavated that would help to show how much was remaining of that 19th century life. And so it helped to spur some of the excavations and work that was going on, and field work definitely continued. The items that were unearthed during this time period are being explored in the lab. Reports are being worked on, but one of the key elements that came out of the Time Team America was the discovery of the 2 other floors, I'm sorry, the earthen floors of the log kitchen. Let me keep going. Okay, so the excavations of the backyard. Now in 2019 or 2018, probably there were over 25,000. To date, as of January 2021, we're closer to about 40 to 50,000 artifacts that have been excavated on the property, over 200 cultural features identified, and evidence, as I stated, of 2 previously unidentified structures, and possibly the overseer's house, and of course the smokehouse. Fence lines, trash area, these items have been uncovered. These are some examples of the artifacts that have been excavated on the site. Glass bottle shards, hand-wrought nails, masonry. 3 dirt floors exist beneath the 20th century wooden floor. One at least appears to date to the early 1800s during Henson's time period. And to recap that, Henson leaves the property in 1825 and is relocated to Kentucky. He comes back to the property between 1828 and 1829 in an effort to secure his freedom with Isaac Riley, and has been forced to sleep in a log kitchen. So if you've read and you're familiar with the autobiography, it's a log kitchen that he describes that he sleeps in. This was the log kitchen. Well, not this one, but this type of log kitchen is what people assumed was the one he slept in when we acquired the property. Here you see them excavating the site, and it was during this Time Team America 2020 2012 excavation that these other dirt floors were discovered. Beneath the floors were found evidence of recreation and food services, well as the laundry services. Keep in mind that a 19th century log kitchen has a wealth of activities. The marbles, the toys found there, evidence of the children that would have been playing. Those too young to work would have been near their mothers working in the log kitchen. Oral history told us that in our log kitchen of the 1850s, there was a loft in which enslaved laborers would have slept inside of that loft of the log kitchen. The most recent of the archaeological excavations is this 19th century farm road, which has been uncovered here and remains uncovered. This is a site, image of, and this farm bred road is one that shows a McAdam style of road, which was uncovered during construction in 2019, 2020. And with this, it replaces the dirt road that came from the park. And if you can see just around the corner, there is an opening right off of Old Georgetown Road that comes into the property, this opening between the trees, which was the old farm road that came onto the property. Now, this was a property that was well over 300 to 400 acres. I'm sorry, if not more, 300 to 500 acres was the size of the original property. And so there were farm roads that went through it. And we're terribly excited that this one has been discovered and will be there for you to explore. As I said, archaeology informs the interpretation as well as the programming for the site. One of the most successful educational field trip programs that has been developed for the property is focused on the archaeological research, providing students hands-on opportunities to understand the role that archaeology plays in the development of a historic site's interpretation, its education. And we have also developed a method to take it into the classrooms. Now, this was all pre-COVID. Now that we are during COVID, there are efforts to take this into a virtual format to share with our students. The exhibit design development phases. As of 2017, we acquired since its acquisition in 2006, we have 5 parcels that make up the complete Josiah Henson Park. We are now just shy of 4 acres. What began with an acre and a half is now at 4 acres, just about 4 acres on the property. And with that, we will have an opportunity. The most recent property that acquired still has residents there. There are residents in each of the houses. What the master plan will do is provide an opportunity when the houses are vacant to dismantle them and open up this backyard area so that we can create more of a 19th century type of landscape to provide more space for outdoor programming, a future amphitheater, to install all essential park shelters that will be needed on the property. We were able to secure Prom Design out of Somerville, Massachusetts as the exhibit designer for the project, who took on the work for this facility plan that was laid out and really bring it to life. Our architectural firm that designed the final visitor center that you will see is Ziegler Sneed. And you have the image there of what the front, and the image coming from the meadow side that they're saying is from the loop. If we're standing at the historic house, this is where you would see a view of the visitor center. The interior layout of the visitor center now has the theater and community room. There is the terrace. When you enter, there'll be the retail space. It's a beautiful lobby area, waiting restrooms. Our bus drop off will be here, the all-important bus drop-off that will safely allow for visitors to enter and exit. And one thing that I will add with the property, let me just go back a second, is to reassure all of our visitors that the property is ADA accessible. I think there is a site plan map coming up. There is. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Let's just move forward. I want you to see that the entire property, there we are. I went the wrong way. is ADA accessible from the visitor center as you walk around the loop that takes you around both of the buildings, and you will pass the archaeological excavated areas. You have the structure that is here, its foundation, as well as the new farm road bed that will be there. The kitchen garden has yet to be placed on the property, but if you can see a glimpse of what the future will look like for the site, where we can place picnic shelters and an outdoor, very rustic amphitheater, nothing with structures, but something that will suit the landscape. That will be a very simple structure, but even the house is ADA accessible. All of the exhibits on the first floor within the log kitchen, as well as the historic house, are accessible. Now, the research library, which will be upstairs on the second floor, is not, but we have ways to accommodate those that are not able to navigate the stairs to the back. Parking, as I stated, is going to be across the street, and along that area, the exhibits begin actually in the parking area. Now, this parking block that's here is where the future parking garage will be on the site. Right now, visitors will still be able to park closer to the Nicholson Lane area here at the park and walk over. As we see again, the flow of the exhibits through the property, and now we have the final entry levels, the entry areas coming into the museum. You have the main entrance into the west wing. You'll walk around, and now you'll exit out of the front of that south wing, which is the screen porch, to take the accessible path around to the log kitchen. We have not allowed for access out of that historic doorway that existed when we purchased the property. You will be entering and exiting from the same space. Now, inside of the log kitchen, there will be an exposed archaeological element there. You will be able to see the exposed earths that were uncovered during the excavation of that log kitchen. And there'll be more pictures. The other thing that Brown was able to do that we were excited about was that we were able to commission original illustrations for the exhibits. This is such an incredible story, the life of Reverend Henson, and by having his words to guide us, they would be incorporated within the exhibit. But we wanted a fresh approach as to how we would illustrate the experience of growing up enslaved, what life on the plantation would be like. And so the work of 4 artists were commissioned for this project. Leslie Evans, whose work you see here on the left, did a number of drawings to depict several scenes that will be located on the exterior outdoor exhibit panels as you go through our outdoor signage. Kyle Baker is an artist whose work in its graphic novel style will be seen throughout the exhibit when we see images of them a little bit later. Now, this graphic novel style is something that's a little bit different for us. It's a little bit different that you see. Now, for our younger audience members, this will look very familiar to them. I remember in showing our advisory committee different scenes from Kyle Baker's work and advising that we'd be doing this graphic novel style. And I got a lot of queer looks. And our advisory committee now has a range of ages of its members from 14 until some in their 70s within there. So, of course, the 14-year-old looks up and is like, yep, that's cool. I like it. It works. So we're rolling forward with it. We also have the work of William Hook, who did this beautiful rendering of what the historic plantation would look like so that visitors would be able to see when you come into the property. And at the visitor center, this is the first of, well, the second of the outdoor interpretive signs that you will see, and it helps to provide a layout. You'll be looking at to the back of the property. There's the Riley House. You are here is where the visitor center is. He did this beautiful illustration, and Rick Snodgrass did the inset of that 1863 map that we saw of the Riley plantation to give a perspective of where this house is in the grand scheme of the plantation. Outdoor exhibits that were designed begin at Wall Local Park. There will be signs that will guide visitors and introduce Reverend Henson and his role in both the Underground Railroad, helping to define, is Maryland a slave state or free state? This information, there is signage in the parking area that welcomes you to the park. As you move through, as I said, here are some of Leslie Evans' illustrations. There's outdoor signage. So anytime that the facility is closed to the public, where the main exhibit's on the inside, anyone can walk around the grounds and learn a little bit about Reverend Henson and about the experience here on the Riley Plantation. So the first exhibit inside of the visitor center is going to be the timeline, which you'll see how that is stretched across the gift shop area. Your exterior exhibit is this a little larger than life-size image of Reverend Henson, and providing, again, a background for those visitors that are going to come during a time when it's closed, his association to Uncle Tom's Cabin. Inside, these are but sketches of what the exhibits look like that focus on Henson's story. What we've done is take Kyle Baker's images, all of the images that you see here and that you'll see throughout the exhibit are woven together with the words of Reverend Henson. What you can't really see here are quotes taken from the autobiography that lend themselves. So as you walk through this, separated from his mother, denied an education, overseer of the plantation, these will be excerpts taken from the actual autobiography that are guiding the story. Inside of the log kitchen will be also the voice of the enslaved. For many who've had an opportunity when we were open to view and walk through the log kitchen, I'd warrant to say that it's probably one of our most sacred spaces on the property, because it is the one space that takes you back to the 19th century. It is inside of this space that you can get a feel of those who labored and toiled inside of this space in tremendous heat during the summertime, in the winter, freezing cold, having to sleep within the spaces. There's an interactive that has been incorporated within the exhibit that will allow you to hear the voices of several of slave narratives, from Henson to Frederick Douglass and a few others, so that you understand what the experience is through their own words. Of course, archaeological exhibits, artifacts are placed throughout the exhibits. Public programs continued. We did outreach programs, and this is the Juneteenth celebration in 2019. This is Jamie Ferguson Coons. Now, Jamie Ferguson, who is our park historian, who did a tremendous work in developing, I want to get to this, the new biography. Jamie's phenomenal. I got to give a shout out to my colleague. This is over a decade's amount of research that's compiled into what we call the quintessential biography of Reverend Henson, which gives that comprehensive look of not only his life, but the life of an enslaved, starting in Charles County, moving through to today, incorporating information and a family tree from the descendants and everything. And by the way, it is available for sale. See me later on that. But it is a must for every library to have this particular book. Fundraising, of course, has continued from its inception throughout. Montgomery Parks Foundation, we couldn't say more for their support throughout the project. Early on, when the capital campaign was begun, there was a leadership conference. There was a partnership with Montgomery County Media, in which there would be 5 installments of a leadership conference that would focus on Reverend Henson's legacy. Remember that legacy that I talked about, where we would model leadership qualities on a local level, faith, how does that impact one's life, not only during enslavement, but carried through to today, as well as service to others. So these themes and so much more, education, were conducted during these leadership conferences. And it's actually from some of the leadership conferences that we were able to recruit members of our current advisory committee, from the wealth of panelists who participated, from assistants in the White House to leaders within the community and educators. It was a phenomenal experience, which is still available online. You can go online and see it. We also have the current campaign that Montgomery Parks Foundation is conducting, and it is the commemorative pavers. Everyone can participate. We've just had an installation recently this past fall of pavers going into the Wall Local Park area, along with the interpretive signs that will greet visitors when you leave your parking spaces here. You will be able to purchase 3 different sizes of commemorative pavers that will be placed along the walkway. There is an ADA accessible pathway taking you from the parking lot along through this safe wooded area as you cross the street to come over into the park. And we encourage everyone to participate in this at any level in which you can. Now we get to the part, what I call the sexiest part of the whole show, is what you really want to see. Is now that we have done the groundwork for the museum, we've established what needs to be on the property, how we're going to bring our visitors in, working on the best accessible routes. What does construction looks like? What happened to the Rozier property, which is this blank space here? So I've got an old-fashioned film strip slideshow to show you. There is no audio here, Matt, not to worry. Just walking you through what construction looked like during the early days. This is the historic house, which has been rehabilitated and renovated just enough so that we could incorporate the new exhibitions. Nothing's been done to the 1930s architectural elements. What we did was simply restore those and to ensure that they would look at their absolute best. We wanted to ensure to retain those. This is the log kitchen now. There's the door coming in to the rear, as historically would have been there. As you see, we pulled up the floors of the living room below our, hang on a second. This is something that we didn't always see. Oh, it won't let me stop. Okay. Well, those log beams below were only seen from the basement for the longest. So we were really excited to be able to see them exposed. Let me get there we are, my cursor. Thank you. And for the visitor center, I have another, we love our time lapse, but here's a quick time lapse video of the construction of the visitor center that takes us from December 2019 until early last year. I'm doing pretty good on time, right? Yeah. There we are. She's almost ready to go and opening soon. Here, I want to walk you through, it seemed much easier to walk you through the park area. We begin at Old Georgetown Road on the sidewalk, taking you around to the visitor center, so that you can have an opportunity to see each of the outdoor interpretive signage. As we're moving through the park area, we have 2 beautifully crafted log benches that were donated to the site by the Leggetts, the bench in the front, and then we have our other bench that's been donated, as well as other benches on the property. Each of those, and plaques are being installed on them. This is that exterior exhibit of Henson, a selfie spot. As I said, the entire park is ADA accessible. Here is your ramp taking you down from the terrace of the visitor center. What you see to the left there was that structure of that archaeological excavation. There is the Riley Plantation outdoor interpretive sign, which gives you a glimpse of what the plantation would have looked like. And then as we move down, we're going to be heading around to the historic house. We'll go in a minute. I know you're anxious. We'll go in a minute. We're just going to walk around on the outside for just a couple minutes here. This is going to be the exit of it, and you can see there are those outdoor exhibits within the screen porch area, taking us around to the log kitchen. We've removed that driveway that we all remember coming in to the historic house. That's gone. The house has gotten fresh paint, looks wonderful. All of the 1970s shrubbery, all of that's gone, to take it back as much as we could exterior to that 19th century appearance where there's not lawns, but you would have workspaces. There is the front entrance to the log kitchen. Here is that farm road, the farm road bed with new signage. As you can see, our archaeologists are still at work when weather permits. One thing I'll add as we're walking around the park here is that this site is rather unique. Our historic site is one of few across the country of African American historic sites where there is ongoing archaeological excavations. So you can expect to hear more about our work that's ongoing with Cassandra and the volunteers and other staff as we grow. Moving forward. There we go. Move on forward for me. Our meat house, which was discovered to be just right where the house is, where the screen porch is, just on the other side of the screen porch. The ribbon tied around the tree played host and witness to one of our first Josiah Henson family descendants family reunion. They came in 2018 and will be returning as soon as we can safely regather onto the park site. That interpretive sign was regarding our agriculture in the farm. This one talks about slave quarters because there are no right now evidence as to where the slave quarters were. Keep in mind, we only have just shy of 4 acres of what would have been a near 500-acre plantation. Here is the site of that structure, the dwelling, and there is signage talking about how the work continues, the work that's been done for the site relating to archaeology, and we're coming back to the entrance of the park. So let's go inside now. This is our new visitor center, and this is the timeline within the new visitor center that incorporates a few artifacts here, archaeological artifacts. There will be the orientation film that's shown. This is the interior space of the auditorium. Again, we see the historic house. We come inside. This is the entrance. This is the west wing now. These are the exhibits. And again, each of the exhibits are going to incorporate, and I'm going to pause it just for a second, each of them are going to incorporate archaeological artifacts. As is seen here, the chamber pot. There are also multimedia exhibits. Within, we have our flip books that explore the history of the house, its ownership. Again, we have more artifacts. Those black panels are the voice of Reverend Henson. On those panels, you will have the story of his life as told in his own words. Let me pause for 1 second. That chair and desk are Isaac Riley's. They were donated from the Riley family descendants to the park. These are going to be a part of the interactives. There's a comparison. I don't really know how to go backwards on this, but oh, I do. There we go. There's a comparison between the autobiography written by Henson, the true story of his life, to Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 Uncle Tom's Cabin novel, so that you will be able to touch as you go through and see snippets from both documents that provide a comparison between where Stowe has taken segments from Henson's life story and retold them in her fictional novel. Let me continue quickly. This is now the living room area where we have our exhibits. Nice open space. We are, of course, will incorporate bits of information about the architectural styles retained from the 1930s. We will, of course, address the stereotypical area, and we bring it forward all the way to the 20th century with the visit of President Obama and Mrs. Obama to England. I can't tell you more. I want to leave some element of surprise, but I will tell you that there's a beautiful portrait there of when they went to England and viewed the diary of Queen Victoria. This is the interior to the log kitchen. And I'll just pause it for a second. Inside of the log kitchen, you can see all of those 20th century elements have been removed. The archaeologists have been, what has been done here is that the hearth area has been exposed. Below, you will be able to see a mirror here that will show you the other floors that have been excavated on the property. You have here a mock exhibit of what the loft would have looked like had it extended all the way across the building. And I think that's it for it. And did you have questions for me? Because I am happy to take them. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much,
Go back
Shirl.
to that and sit.
We do have quite a few questions that have come
Okay.
in. We are a little limited on time, so I'll try to get to as many of those as I can.
Okay.
But we'll try and get through these. Someone asks, are there any current efforts to promote the life and history of Reverend Henson? Actually, let me see if I can get you to start your camera, and I'll start over on the question here.
Oh, I stopped.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, hang on.
Okay, all right. So let me start over. Are there any current efforts to promote the life and history of Reverend Henson and also the park on a more national level, especially for visitors to DC and Montgomery County?
Absolutely. While we can do what we're doing virtually, we have several events happening this month coming up for Black History Month. We will be re-airing Redeeming Uncle Tom, which was the Canadian documentary. If you all remember in 2018, Josiah, that will re-air. We will re-air the Time Team America documentary, as well as hosting a live panel discussion, which speaks specifically as to the role of this museum within the grand scale of national museums, particularly for African American museums, but also how does his story play out here in Maryland, throughout the nation, as well as Canada. So we will have a range of talent within our panel, from Canada to Harriet Beecher Stowe to representatives from the museum community. So we definitely plan to go national.
Okay. All right. Next question I have here is, what a sad irony that, quote, Uncle Tom, a heroic character in the Stowe novel based on a truly strong and heroic real man, Henson, came to be a pejorative term for an obsequious Black person. Can your exhibit address that and maybe help correct it?
Oh, most definitely. we're not shying away from anything. We are helping people to understand how the evolution or the de-evolution really of what was a historic figure, as we know, or not a historic figure, but the Christian martyr that Stowe made Tom out to be when the book was published, and how that de-evolved into this caricature and the stereotypical image of Tom, into the subservient older Black man, to where we get to the racial slur of a race traitor. So definitely the exhibit will tackle that.
Okay, and I think you addressed these a little bit. They came in right before you started talking about the floor, but someone asks, how did the lower floors get filled? Can you explain the lower floor, the 2 earthen floors a little bit? So explain kind of how that changes over time, I guess, is really where they're going.
Okay. So keep in mind, this is a log kitchen, and log kitchens and typically 19th century kitchens will burn down, or they will be the first of the buildings that probably will need to be replaced, repaired. And so as they are raised and a new building constructed on top of it, this is how you will have structures built one on top of the other, one on top of the other, to the point where we have our 1850s log kitchen that has built on top of existing ones. They either burned down, they're taken down because they deteriorated, and a new one has to be built on top of it. And so this is how we arrive at our current log kitchen.
Okay. Someone asks, where was the log kitchen in 1828-29 when Josiah returned and slept there?
That we don't know yet. We know that there are existing floors beneath. As archaeological excavations continue and research continues, then maybe we can determine that they're probably right in that exact same spot. But what we know is we suspect it could be in that, but we just don't know definitively where the one was from the 1820s when Henson came back to the property.
Okay. Another attendee
Working on
asks,
it.
and that's your job, is to keep finding out more. Another attendee asks, has a cemetery been discovered?
Not as of yet. No, we don't know where the, if you're talking about for the enslaved on the property, we've not discovered that yet. That's probably on private property. We only have 4 acres.
Okay. This is a little bit of a longer one, so I'll go ahead and just read this out. Historical marker and other accounts relate that Josiah Henson had a conversion experience and/or was baptized at the site of the Newport Mills near the historically Black community of Kengar in Montgomery County. In his autobiography, Mr. Henson describes this event but does not say where it occurred. Do we know it occurred at the Newport Mills? And if so, will there be any effort to amplify can't speak today, the recognition of the event, especially given the site is already a county park?
That's a great question. There is, as you said, a marker that's there on site. There could possibly come to be an interpretive sign that's there within our current planning. We, within Parks right now, aren't planning to do any additional work at the site, but there's always room for an opportunity to add additional interpretive signage. We definitely will talk about that and inform people when they come to the property and they take the tours that Newport Mill is a site for them definitely to go and visit while they're in Montgomery County, to see that this was the place of his conversion. So we'll add that to the list.
Okay. This one I've got it from a couple people. Are there any areas that can be visited today? It's like the outdoor area, is that visitable?
Absolutely. You can walk the grounds today. The buildings are closed, but you most definitely can walk around the grounds that where I literally showed the video walking around. You too can walk in my steps.
Okay. Can you tell us more about what became of the Riley family and the remaining enslaved workers after the Maryland Emancipation in 1864 and the end of the Civil War? Do descendants still live in Montgomery County?
That is a research question for us that research is ongoing. And so we're continuing to find out. We have been in contact with a few of the Riley descendants, one particularly who sits on our advisory committee. She lives in Anne Arundel County. And for the descendants of those who were enslaved at the time when Maryland's emancipation occurs in 1864. That's something that we will have to research. It's
Okay.
ongoing.
What was it that
But
made
great
the owners,
question.
what was it that made the owners of this property through the 20th century not replace or tear down that log cabin portion?
Well, as I said, there is the folklore that's attached to it, but the history of it passed on. There was one image I didn't show you, but there was an article done with the Bolton family when they were interviewed in the 1930s, and they reference that this was Uncle Tom's cabin at that time period. And so for those subsequent property owners who lived in that house, that history passed on with it. So I'm fairly certain that's part of the reason that this house remained as it was without changes to it, is that they too wanted to help preserve this history, even though they didn't allow public to walk through their den, but family and friends were able to see it and people could drive by for those locals who knew.
Okay. Someone asks, wouldn't basing the museum only on Henson's autobiographies run the risk of conflict with the actual history of his life based on scholarly research using other primary sources? How do you intend to handle questions challenging Henson's depiction of himself?
Through scholarly research. Most definitely. We are, as I said, research is ongoing. And so with that exhibit, the words that are told guide the interpretive themes of the exhibit. We trust those. Those are, that in and of itself is a primary document. And the biography and the research that Jamie has done does explore all of the other elements that make up the life around him. What life is like on this type of plantation, what life was like in Charles County, what life is like in Canada for him in moving through, so that there is hopefully a marriage between the scholarly research as well as his document, his autobiography, his own words of his life.
Okay. I'm going to do two more questions and then we're going to wrap up because we've got to get to the next sessions. How do you see the Josiah Henson Museum fitting into the overall depiction of slavery in Maryland, especially considering the many historical plantation homes that currently tell that story?
I say that we are going to be a welcomed addition to it, as we are telling the story of enslavement within Maryland from the perspective of the enslaved. So I think that we will definitely be an asset to the company of historic sites focused on African American history, focused on Maryland history, local history.
Okay. Now the last question we have here, Shirl, is where can we find out more about giving to fundraising efforts?
Josiah Henson site.org. No, not the website. The website has changed. JosiahHenson.org. Or you can go to Montgomery Parks Foundation's webpage and definitely contribute.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Shirl. We're going to wrap things up. I have to go get ready for the next sessions. Shirl, any last closing thoughts for us?
Come see us.
As soon as possible.
Well, when we open, and just keep in mind that due to COVID restrictions, we're following all necessary protocols. So when we do open to the public, be on the lookout. We will have time ticket entrances when we do, but you are always welcome to come and walk the grounds and visit us and take part and share. What I can ask people to do is become our advocates and share his story throughout the state, throughout the county, throughout the region, so that more people know and will be able to appreciate his life and legacy.
Okay, Shirl, thank you so much.